Elizabeth Eckford is 15 years old, standing in front of her bathroom mirror, putting on the dress she made herself, black and white checked, carefully pressed, modest and proper because her mother told her to look her best on the first day of school, and she has no idea that in less than an hour she'll be walking through a screaming mob of 1,000 white people who want her dead. That photographers will capture the hatred on their faces and the dignity on hers, that the image of her walking alone toward Central High School will become one of the most iconic photographs of the 20th century, that this morning will define courage for generations to come. She doesn't know any of this yet because right now she's just a girl getting ready for school, nervous about classes and teachers and whether she'll make friends, and she checks her reflection one more time, picks up her notebook and purse, walks out the door into a morning that looks ordinary but will become historic, and she heads toward the bus stop thinking she'll meet the other 8 students there. The 8 other black teenagers who were selected to integrate Central High School, but when she arrives at the meeting spot nobody's there because there was a last. She gets on the bus, rides through familiar streets that suddenly feel different, gets off at the stop near Central High School, and starts walking toward the building, and that's when she sees them, hundreds of white people lining the streets, held back by police barricades and National Guard soldiers, and she thinks maybe they're there to protect her, maybe this won't be so bad, maybe the adults were exaggerating the danger. She keeps walking, and the screaming starts. The year is 1957, and America is 3 years past Brown v. Board of Education, the Supreme Court decision that declared school segregation unconstitutional, but declaring something unconstitutional and actually integrating schools are 2 very different things, and in Little Rock, Arkansas, the white community has spent those 3 years preparing to resist, organizing citizens' councils and petitions and political pressure, doing everything they can to keep Central High School all white. Because the thought of their children sitting next to black children in classrooms feels to them like the end of civilization, like surrendering everything they believe about racial hierarchy and Southern tradition and the natural order of things. But the NAACP isn't backing down, and they've carefully selected 9 black students to integrate Central High, not the poorest students or the richest, not the most militant or the most accommodating, but kids who are smart and resilient and come from stable families, kids who can handle the pressure of being first, and Elizabeth Eckford is one of them, chosen because she's an excellent student, because she's mature for her age, because she has the quiet strength that the NAACP believes will be necessary to survive what's coming. They've been meeting all summer, these 9 students and their families, sitting in church basements and community centers while NAACP officials prepare them for what to expect, the insults, the threats, the loneliness of being one of 9 black students in a school of 2,000 white students, and they practice how to respond, how to keep their faces calm when people call them names, how to walk with dignity when people spit at them, how to survive in an environment designed to break them. Elizabeth listens to all of this and thinks she understands, thinks she's prepared, but nobody can really prepare you for what she's walking into now because preparation assumes you'll have support, assumes you'll be part of a group, assumes you won't be completely alone facing a mob that sounds like it wants to tear you apart. She walks toward the school entrance, her notebook clutched against her chest like a shield, her white sunglasses reflecting the morning sun, and the crowd's volume increases with every step. Go home, nigger. We don't want you here. 2, 4, 6, 8, we ain't gonna integrate. And she can see their faces now, twisted with rage, mothers holding babies while screaming obscenities, teenagers her own age looking at her with pure hatred, and she keeps walking because what else can she do, where else can she go? She came here to attend school and the school is right there, just across this gauntlet of fury. She reaches the line of National Guard soldiers, expects them to let her through, expects them to protect her because that's what soldiers do, but instead they cross their rifles in front of her, blocking her path, and one of them says, "You can't go in," and Elizabeth doesn't understand, asks, "But I'm supposed to go to school here," and the soldier just shakes his head and the crowd behind her erupts in cheers because they've won this round. They've stopped her, and Elizabeth turns around and realizes she has to walk back through that mob, has to retrace her steps through a. This is when the photograph is taken, Elizabeth walking away from the school, her face composed but her eyes hidden behind those white sunglasses, and behind her a white girl named Hazel Bryan, 15 years old just like Elizabeth, screaming with her mouth wide open, face contorted with hate, and the contrast between them becomes one of the most powerful images of the civil rights movement: dignity versus rage, grace versus hate. One girl trying to get an education and another girl trying to stop her. Elizabeth makes it to the bus stop, sits down on the bench, and only then does she let herself cry, not loud sobs but quiet tears sliding down her face while white people continue shouting at her, continue celebrating her defeat, and she sits there waiting for a bus that seems like it will never come, and she has no idea that across town the other 8 students are safe with their parents and ministers. No idea that she was supposed to be with them, no idea that this moment of isolation wasn't planned but will become the defining image of Little Rock Nine's courage. A white woman sits down next to her, Grace Lorch, wife of a local professor, one of the few white people in Little Rock willing to publicly support. The photograph of Elizabeth walking through that mob appears in newspapers across America and around the world the next day, and the reaction is immediate and overwhelming because people can see it, can see exactly what segregation looks like when you strip away all the polite language about separate but equal, and states' rights, and our way of life. It looks like a 15-year-old girl in a homemade dress being screamed at by adults. It looks like soldiers blocking a child from attending school. It looks like hatred so pure and undisguised that even people who considered themselves moderate on racial issues have to confront what they're actually supporting. President Eisenhower, who has been reluctant to enforce school integration, sees the photographs and realizes he can't ignore this anymore because the whole world is watching and America's credibility on human rights is being destroyed by images of white mobs attacking black children, so he does something unprecedented. He sends the 101st Airborne Division, elite Army paratroopers, to Little Rock with orders to integrate Central High School by force if necessary. On September 25, 1957, 3 weeks after that first terrible morning, Elizabeth and the other 8 students return to Central High School, but this time they're surrounded by armed soldiers. This time there's no ambiguity about whether they're allowed in. This time the federal government of the United States has decided that these 9 black teenagers will attend this white school whether Little Rock likes it or not. They walk through the doors and the school year begins, but walking through the doors is just the beginning because now they have to survive every single day in a building where most students hate them, where teachers undermine them, where every trip to the bathroom or the cafeteria becomes an exercise in endurance, where acid is thrown in their faces and their lockers are vandalized and they're tripped in hallways and burned with hot soup and called every name imaginable, and they have to take it without fighting back because fighting back would give the segregationists exactly what they want, an excuse to expel them and declare the integration experiment a failure. Elizabeth endures all of this with the same quiet dignity she showed in that first photograph, never responding to insults, never giving her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing her break, and when reporters ask her how she manages to stay calm she says, "I just keep reminding myself why I'm here to get an education, and nobody can stop me from learning if I don't let them." The harassment continues all year, and in May 1958, when Elizabeth and the other Little Rock 9 students walk across the stage at graduation, well, not all of them, because only Ernest Green is a senior but even this victory is temporary because the segregationists aren't done yet, and the next year Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus closes all of Little Rock's public high schools rather than continue integration, and for an entire year there are no public high schools in Little Rock, thousands of students with nowhere to go. White students and black students all suffering because the white community would rather have no schools than integrated schools, and it takes another year and another legal battle before the schools finally reopen and integration continues. Through all of this, the photograph of Elizabeth walking through that mob remains, becomes iconic, gets published in history textbooks and documentaries and museum exhibits, and Elizabeth Eckford becomes a symbol of courage that transcends her individual story because what she did that morning, walking alone through hatred with her head up and her dignity intact, represents something fundamental about the civil rights movement, the decision to claim your humanity even when everyone around you denies it, the decision to insist on your right to exist in spaces that were designed to exclude you, the decision to walk through hell if that's what it takes to get an education. Years later, in the 1990s, something remarkable happens. Elizabeth Eckford and Hazel Bryan, the 2 girls from that famous photograph, meet and try to reconcile, because Hazel has spent decades living with the shame of being forever captured in that moment of hate, of having her 15-year-old rage preserved in history books, and she wants to apologize, wants Elizabeth to know that she's not that person anymore, that she grew up and realized how wrong she was. They meet, they talk, but then Hazel starts doing interviews, starts positioning herself as someone who overcame racism, starts making the story about her journey rather than Elizabeth's suffering, and Elizabeth realizes that Hazel still doesn't fully understand, still can't quite grasp that the harm wasn't just that one moment of screaming but a lifetime of being defined by that moment, of being the girl in that photograph forever, of carrying the weight of representing courage when she never asked to be a symbol. She just wanted to go to school. They stop speaking, and the redemption narrative collapses, and maybe that's more honest anyway because some wounds don't heal cleanly, some harm can't be undone with apologies, some history is too heavy to resolve in a single conversation. Elizabeth lives the rest of her life in Little Rock, becomes a social worker, helps vulnerable people navigate systems designed to exclude them, and she carries the legacy of that September morning in 1957 not as a badge of honor but as a reality she has to live with. The reality that she became a symbol before she was ready, that her courage was tested before she knew she had courage to test, that she walked through hell at 15 years old and survived but not without scars. When people ask her if she regrets it, if she wishes she hadn't been chosen to integrate Central High School, she says no, she doesn't regret it, because someone had to do it and she's proud that she was strong enough to endure, but she also admits that she wishes it hadn't been necessary, wishes America hadn't forced children to be heroes, wishes she could have just been a regular 15-year-old girl worried about regular 15-year-olds. And that's the real lesson of Little Rock 9, the lesson that goes beyond the triumphant narrative of integration and federal intervention and brave students. The lesson is that we ask children to pay the price for America's racism, we put 15-year-olds on the front lines of a battle that adults should have fought generations earlier. We made kids like Elizabeth Eckford walk through mobs and endure daily torture so that America could maybe, possibly, eventually decide that black children deserved the same education as white children. The courage is real, the dignity is real, the achievement is real, but so is the cost, and we shouldn't celebrate the courage without acknowledging the cost, shouldn't praise the dignity without recognizing that dignity shouldn't have been necessary, shouldn't honor the achievement without admitting that we failed these children long before we asked them to be heroes. A 15-year-old girl walks through 1,000 people who want her dead. She walks alone because of a miscommunication, because her family doesn't have a phone, because sometimes history turns on small things like who gets the message and who doesn't. She walks with her notebook and her homemade dress and her white sunglasses and her quiet dignity. Behind her, a mob screams. In front of her, soldiers block the door. She's not allowed to go to school today. But she'll come back. And the next time, the army will make sure she gets through that door. Not because America suddenly decided black children deserved education. But because the whole world was watching. And the photograph of Elizabeth walking alone made it impossible to look away. That's what courage looks like. Not fearlessness, but walking anyway. Not certainty, but showing up anyway. Not invincibility, but enduring anyway. Elizabeth Eckford was 15 years old and she walked through hell to go to school. And America, slowly, painfully, reluctantly, was forced to ask itself why a child had to be that brave just to get an education. We still haven't fully answered that question. But on September 4, 1957, a girl in a black and white dress walked toward a school she wasn't allowed to enter. And the photograph of that walk changed history.